Hi everyone, welcome. What you see out here on my bench is a pair of European nightcrawler worm bins. ENC is my abbreviation for European nightcrawler. These two bins were both launched on the same day, and pretty much everything we've done with these systems was meant to keep them in sync with one another, except we did deviate over in bin number 1 to your left by running a little bit of a test. And in that bin we've got a compostable bag. The test with the compostable bag has been in progress now for over a year, and I don't really consider that 384 days as really the actual amount of time that the compostable bag has been breaking down. I treat this lower number over here, 338 days, as the actual time spent decomposing, because there was a period of time where the bag was kind of pulled out of the system and was left out on the surface and uncovered and dry and no worm activity. So I deducted a certain period of time, and you might be wondering, oh, 176-day-old bin, how could you have started something over a year ago if the bins are only 176 days old? Well, that's because the compostable bag test started when these worms still lived in their previous homes. So when those systems got harvested, the worms came over to these new bins and the compostable bag came with them. So we fed these systems 15 times so far. It's been a couple weeks now, 2 weeks exactly, since we last checked in on these guys. So my assumption is that they're probably ready to get fed. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. A week ago we did come into bin number 1, and it was thought that bin number 1 was the system with the fewer number of worms living in it, so we added some worms, and those were the worms that were occupying my time-lapse container. And the time-lapse had come to an end, and the worms needed to be reunited with the population that they had been recruited from to participate in the time-lapse. So this system received a few extra worms, and that check-in a week ago was not to feed or to even come in here to bin number 2 to do anything. It was strictly to release worms into bin number 1. Now, once again, you're seeing a little difference here. Last time we were in here to feed both bins 2 weeks ago, we introduced these new top coverings of cardboard, and we just figured we'd put a little twist on it by positioning this smaller piece of brown corrugated cardboard on top in bin number 1, and in bin number 2 we positioned it beneath the white single layer cardboard. So this is that type of cardboard that has 2 layers, and it's got the wavy corrugated intermediate layer with some air gaps inside. Here, this stuff, the white cardboard, is just that kind of almost like a cereal box type cardboard, single layer. And I did imagine that in between the layers would be a place where the worms might like to crawl in and hang out, since they do seem to like confined, tight spaces. Over here, though, oddly enough, I'm not seeing any of that. The worms did not crawl in between the 2 layers of cardboard. There was one worm in between this little piece of cardboard and the so-called feeding zone indicator. And our feeding zone indicators are getting gobbled up here. This one's already separated into 2 pieces. When I see all these little tiny white insects, the springtails, I sometimes wonder if it's actually worms nibbling away the paper, or is it actually or could it be the springtails? I just noticed a little cocoon right here, right on the tip of my finger. Pretty tough to see. It's very, very small, but the worms appear to have left a cocoon out there. There might be other ones that I'm just not noticing. So maybe that other aspect of the 2 layers of cardboard resting up against each other also provides sort of a place where there's extra friction, where the worms can sort of detach their cocoon from their body when it's ready for that to occur. So I guess the only drawback of having all these multiple layers of feeding zone indicator, stacks of cardboard layers, plastic, even that shade paper on top, was that it takes forever just to gain access to the system. So finally, we're down into the worm bins. And the feeding that they got 2 weeks ago was just an assortment of all kinds of different frozen veggies, mainly, I believe. I don't know if there might have been some frozen fruit in there too, but I think it was in large part frozen veggies. Applied in the manner that we normally use, which is just to position it right down the middle. And the other stuff that we're encountering here are stuff that are just slow composting leftover items from, you know, probably at this point many months since they were placed in here. This is a mango seed, which only finally was soft enough that I was able to sort of open it up this way a couple check-ins ago. Over and over again, we would try every time we would pop in here to see if we can open the thing up and provide the worms with access to the inside of the thing. And now they finally have access. So here I'm going a little bit slow, as we normally do in bin number 1 when we're attempting to gain access to where we left the compostable bag. Usually I attempt to position the bag in a place where I assume we're going to see a good bit of worm traffic. So last time, as you could see, banana peel was on the menu, and an opened up banana peel to me seemed like a great place to position the compostable bag to ensure a good bit of worm traffic on it. So here I've got what appears to be the entirety of the compostable bag. Oddly enough, somehow the thing is managing to remain as a single object. I thought it would have kind of like gone to shreds at this point, but it definitely seems to be holding together as a single object. And that in itself kind of makes me question whether or not it's even breaking down at all, or what's going on with this thing. So, you know, I do wonder if at some point maybe we just have to decide that it isn't going to ever break down here in the worm bin, and perhaps just, you know, call off the test and remove the thing and just chuck it in the trash, or maybe put it someplace where we know it's going to, you know, have the amount of time it does require to finally break down and be composted. It just, you know, kind of makes me question what their definition of compostable is, you know. I mean, I didn't try to see if the bag had any sort of fine print on it or detailed description as to the type of composting required to see that thing break down eventually. But sometimes, you know, when you think about composting, you do think about hot composting, as a lot of people do. Maybe they got like a compost pile, and then once you apply all the browns and greens and moisture and oxygen, the process that ensues, that ends up breaking the materials down, is the hot composting process. Worm bins do, to a small degree, experience that too, since there are similar brown and green type materials getting combined into a damp environment. And they also start to heat up a little bit sometimes in little specific spots. But that's not really what breaks things down in a worm bin when you're composting with worms. It's more consumption of the materials by the occupants of the bins. And I described it that way because it's not just the worms that do the work. They're not the only occupants of the bin. As you saw, we got springtails in here. We got bacteria and microbes, which we'll never really see outright. But they're in here too, and depending on your worm bins, it really varies from person to person and from worm bin to worm bin what types of helper critters are in there doing the work of breaking stuff down. So here in bin number 2, I don't believe we need to be as careful about excavating the feeding zone and exploring what's going on, because here we don't have a compostable bag test going on. Here we just have the leftovers from the previous feeding. And I am always kind of curious, you know, I can't seem to resist satisfying my sense of curiosity. I am always curious to see how the materials fed last time are progressing towards the finish line, and it does seem like they've done away with the majority of the stuff that they were fed last time. Naturally, the mango seed is going to last. The banana peel they got last time is going to take a little while as well. And at the very end, the banana peel's stem is going to still remain even after the peel itself has been consumed by the worms, and that's all, you know, dependent on the toughness, you know, of the materials that they're being tasked to consume. So last time we used my prepared bedding, but sometimes I just reach in my pocket and I pull out a couple napkins that have just been kind of causing me to sit sideways because I always feel like, you know, I finish a meal and instead of just throwing the napkin aside and letting it go into the trash and ultimately letting it go into the landfill, I always feel like, you know, I could probably get some sort of a better use out of this used napkin than just chucking it in the trash. And usually what I've got in mind when I'm thinking that way is giving it to the worms. So that's going to be our bedding, and I got to tell you, the feeding zone indicators that we had in here were so far gone already that I figured we would just repurpose them as well as supplementary bedding down in the feeding zone. The feeding we got for them is an assortment of white or green cabbage, purple or red cabbage, never know what to call that stuff, a couple more banana peels, and some cucumber peels. And I've also got this stuff over here. I've just been amassing a collection of bread type stuff lately. And this is, you know, it kind of looks like bread, but it's actually what I know in Hungarian as kolacs. And I think I've seen it on the shelves in the store. It's labeled as kala. So I'm not exactly sure what it is, but when you taste it, it's got the, you know, consistency and texture of bread, but it's sweet. It's got a nice sweet flavor to it, which to some people might seem a little bit unusual, but if you've ever had this stuff, you'll know it's yummy. Definitely good stuff. So before we lose track of the compostable bag test, I usually try to take what's been provided as far as the food assortment and try to sort of cherry pick the sort of food items that I think are going to attract a crowd. So to me, it seemed like if we were to take that fresh new banana peel as well as some of these cucumber peels and position the compostable bag on that stuff, and perhaps even bring back bits and pieces of the old banana peel, that to me seemed like perhaps a way to kind of stack the deck in our favor, if you will, in terms of creating a space where the worms are going to be attracted to and interested in hanging out and helping us break down the stuff that we're giving them. So once again, over here in bin number 2, it feels like we could just be a little less careful when it comes to setting up their feeding zones, and we somehow managed to lose track of the fact that I got a little pile of leftovers over here on the side too, which I like to reposition back down in the feeding zone, so let's not forget to get that taken care of as well. And that's pretty much it. I've got my pulverized eggshell here, which I'm going to apply pretty liberally. Worms definitely like their grit, and that's what the pulverized eggshell does. It provides them with a source of grit to include with the foods that they're eating to help it break down. So they ingest small particle size tough materials down into their gizzards. So they don't have stomachs like you and me, they have gizzards, and down in their gizzard, a little muscular organ where the foods they eat plus these hard objects, perhaps just little granules of sand or rock or whatever they can get their hands on. That's how they break down the stuff. So it's not acid breaking down the foods that they're eating like in our stomachs. It's just small particle size, tough objects that they swallow. And then it's the gizzard that grinds this stuff down. So I think last time we just skipped examining the outer edges of these systems, and I figured, you know what? Let's try to do it again. Let's try to break away from being such a creature of habit and leave the outer edges to be. And then perhaps next time we'll check in to see how things look down in the outer edges of the bins. But if I'm remembering correctly, we decided to forego doing that here in these systems last time, and perhaps we'll just go another round without excavating the outer edges. Any worms hanging out there are probably going to be wondering, you know, hey, how come we haven't seen any action? And you know, I did not bring coffee down for these little guys today. I fed my supply of coffee to the systems that I was checking in on yesterday, so today no feeding zone indicators. Perhaps we'll just pretend that these pieces of small brown cardboard are our feeding zone indicators to remind us that the feeding was applied down the middle of these systems, and that'll help us find our way back when we come back in here next time to feed. As if we would have a hard time finding where the feeding zones are. So that's it for our check-in, everyone. You might remember last time I finished off the check-in thinking that it might be nice to provide these worms with a little bit of shade underneath this translucent plastic top covering, and that was my homework that I did off camera. So that's where these came from. So that's just proof that I did follow through on my homework. So I got a couple things to take care of getting cleaned up and put away. Not going to waste your time with that. That's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.